The mountains don't care. That's the first thing you notice about Colorado in October. The ridgelines, the sky. The way the light falls across everything like it has all the time in the world and nowhere else to be. A two-lane road cuts through the pines. Empty. Quiet. The kind of quiet that only exists above 5,000 feet, where the world gets thin and honest. Then, a car, silver, expensive, sitting completely still on the shoulder. A woman stands beside it, coat, good shoes. The bearing of someone who has not been still in a very long time. She holds her phone up to the sky like an offering. Nothing. She looks at the mountains. They look back, and then, in the distance, the sound of an engine. Growing closer. An old blue pickup comes around the curve. She turns, he steps out, and somewhere in the space between them, 35 years hold their breath. She had everything. The corner office, the company, the life that looked from the outside exactly like success. What she didn't have was anyone to tell about it. And she had stopped noticing that, until a car broke down on a mountain road in Colorado, and a man with grease on his hands raised one hand over his shoulder as he drove away. And 35 years collapsed into a single breath. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Phoenix, Arizona, October. The alarm went off at 5:15, like it always did. Meg Harlow was already awake. She lay in the dark for exactly 2 minutes, not because she needed to. Because her body had forgotten how to sleep past 4:30, and the 2 minutes between 4:30 and the alarm were the only time all day when nobody needed anything from her. Then she got up. The bathroom mirror was unforgiving at this hour. Platinum hair, silver now, not the warm blonde it used to be, pulled back without thinking. A face that had earned every line on it, though she rarely thought of it that way. She thought of it as evidence. Of time passing, of work done, of a life that had been, by any measurable standard, successful. She did not think of it as a face that was lonely. She had learned a long time ago not to think of it that way. The bedroom was large. Too large, probably, for one person. King-sized bed with pillows arranged on both sides out of habit. The left side was hers. The right side had a pillow she fluffed every morning and never touched at night. 8 years of doing this without once deciding to. The nightstand on the right still had Robert's reading glasses in the drawer. She knew this without opening it. She hadn't opened it in 3 years, but she knew. There was a photograph on her nightstand. Robert at 60, standing in front of their first house in Scottsdale, squinting into the sun and grinning because she'd said something that made him laugh right before she took the picture. She couldn't remember what she'd said. She used to lie awake trying to remember. Then she stopped trying. She picked up the phone. 7 emails already. At 5:18 in the morning. She answered 3 of them before the coffee finished brewing. In the second drawer of her bedside table, the one she dingy did so occasionally, there was a plain white envelope. No label. No return address. She had carried it through 3 house moves, 1 marriage, 8 years of widowhood, 1 relocation from Texas to Arizona, when Warren had suggested Phoenix made more sense for the business, and she had said yes without arguing because she was tired and he was probably right. The envelope came with her every time. She didn't always look at it. Weeks would go by, months even, but she knew where it was. Always knew. She didn't open it this morning. She just looked at the drawer for a moment, standing there in her gray travel clothes, coffee in one hand, phone in the other, and then she closed it and went downstairs. Today she was driving to Colorado. She did this every year, drove up to visit Robert's grave on the anniversary of his passing. She always flew. Efficient, quick. Back by Sunday. This year she was driving. She hadn't told Warren why. She hadn't entirely told herself why either. Only that when she'd gone to book the flight, her hand had hesitated over the keyboard. And then she'd typed something different into the search bar. Highway 67, Pine Ridge, Colorado. Driving time from Phoenix, 6 hours and 40 minutes. She'd booked a car service, then canceled it. Then decided she would drive herself. She hadn't been back to Pine Ridge since 1989. The morning traffic on I-10 was already thick at 6. Phoenix never really slept. It just dimmed slightly between 2 and 5, and then roared back to life like an engine that couldn't idle. Meg drove through it on autopilot. The city unfolded in the rearview mirror, glass towers catching the first light, the desert turning gold at the edges. She'd built something real here. Harlow Properties. $12 million when she started, 8 years ago, after Robert died, and the grief had been so large, that the only thing keeping her from going under was having something to do at 6 in the morning besides cry. Now the company was worth substantially more. She didn't think about the numbers much anymore. They were just numbers. What she thought about, more often lately, was a conversation she'd had with her doctor back in July. Your blood work is fine, Dr. Whitaker had said. Blood pressure's great, heart's good, you're healthy. A pause. You just look tired, Meg. Not physically tired, the other kind. I'm fine, Meg had said. I know you are, Dr. Whitaker had said. And left it there. The other kind of tired. She'd been thinking about that for 3 months. She stopped for gas outside Flagstaff. Stood in the October wind while the pump ran and looked north at the sky. That dark blue that only existed in high desert country before the sun fully committed to the day. Her phone rang. Warren, she answered. Mom, are you on the road already? Since 6. You should have let me arrange a driver. I like driving. A pause. Warren's pauses always had texture. This one was the texture of a 35-year-old man who ran a $200 million company and still worried about his mother the way people worried when they'd already lost one parent. You're going up Highway 67? Part of the way. That road is. I've driven worse roads, Warren. You haven't driven anything in 3 years. You've had drivers? Then I'm overdue. Another pause. Shorter. Call by when you get there. I'll call you when I get to the grave. That's what I'm going there for. Mom, I'll call, I promise. She hung up, the pump clicked off. She got back in the car and turned north. Highway 67 started about 40 minutes east of where the Highway Atlas thought it started. The turnoff was easy to miss. A faded green sign half hidden behind a pinon pine that had grown considerably since 1989. She almost missed it again. But she didn't. She turned, the road narrowed, the world changed. The flat desert folded itself upward into ridges and canyons. Pines appeared at the edges of everything. The temperature dropped 10 degrees in 20 minutes. The sky got closer. The silence got heavier. She drove slower than she needed to. She was in no rush. That was a new feeling. She had been in a rush for so long, since Robert died certainly, but honestly even before that, since Warren was small, since the company's early years, that not being in a rush felt almost suspicious. Like she was missing something. Like there was an alarm she'd forgotten to set. She turned the radio off, just drove. The October light came through the pines in long golden strips. A hawk rode a thermal above the canyon wall to her left. The road curved, then curved again. She was thinking about nothing in particular when the car made a sound. Not a dramatic sound. Not a bang or a screech. Just a quiet, somewhat resigned chug. Then a slight shudder, then silence, complete silence. The engine was off. Meg steered to the shoulder, barely a shoulder, and stopped. She tried the ignition. Nothing. Not even a click. The car had not warned her. It had simply stopped, the way certain things simply stop. Without explanation. She got out. The road was empty in both directions, beautiful and completely useless. Her phone showed 1 bar. Then none. Then 1 again. She held it up like an offering. Of course, she said, not panicked. Just tired the way you got tired when the universe made a small, pointed joke at your expense. She stood on the shoulder and looked at the mountains. They were very beautiful, entirely indifferent to her situation. She appreciated that, actually. Mountains did not care who you were or what your quarterly projections looked like. They were simply there. Enormous, permanent, utterly unimpressed. She had been standing there for about 8 minutes, debating whether to start walking toward Pine Ridge or wait and hope for a signal, when she heard the engine. Distant at first, then closer. She turned. An old pickup truck came around the far curve, blue, originally. The paint had faded to something between blue and memory. It slowed as it approached. Then it stopped. The door opened. A man stepped out. He was tall. The kind of tall that came from being built correctly rather than just being large. Broad shoulders under a blue flannel shirt worn soft from years of washing. Jeans with a crease of grease near the left knee that hadn't quite washed out. Hair going salt and pepper, cut short and practical. Hands, she noticed the hands, large and capable, with the condition of someone who spent their days taking things apart and putting them back together. Looked first. Not at her, at the car, then at her. His eyes were steady, attentive. The eyes of someone who looked at things in order to actually see them. Sounds like your alternator, he said. Or a cable. His voice was low, unhurried. Like the road, like the mountains. Please, Meg said. She stepped back. He popped the hood without asking. Bent over the engine with a small flashlight he'd pulled from his shirt pocket without seeming to reach for it. It was just there, the way tools were just there for men who knew how to use them. He looked for about 30 seconds. Battery cables come loose. Probably the vibration on this road. He straightened. Got something in the truck. Give me a minute. He went back to the pickup, opened the toolbox in the bed, returned with a wrench. Meg watched him work. And that was when it started, that feeling. Not recognition, not yet. The faint, unsettling sense that something was familiar. The way a song feels familiar before you remember its name. The way he held the wrench. The economy of his movements. The fact that he didn't narrate what he was doing, didn't explain himself, didn't perform competence. He simply was competent, which was different, which was rarer than people thought. Try it now, he said. Meg got in, turned the key, the engine roared to life, smooth and steady, as if it had never failed her at all. She sat there a moment before getting out, just listening to it run. Then she stepped out. Thank you, really. You have no idea. Cable came loose. Happens. He closed the hood. Let me pay you. She was already reaching for her purse. Please, what do I owe you? Nothing. It took 4 minutes. He folded a rag, put it in his back pocket. I'm not going to take money for tightening a bolt. The way he said it wasn't unkind. Wasn't proud either. It was just how things were. Meg looked at him. Then at least take my card. She found one in her coat pocket. She always had cards somewhere on her person, a reflex so old she no longer noticed it. She held it out, he took it, glanced down, and something changed, just for a second. His hand, completely steady until now, went still. He looked at the card, then up at her, then back at the card. Then he put it in the breast pocket of his flannel shirt and said, "Drive safe. Road gets worse around the next 2 curves." He went back to his truck. "Thank you," she said again. He raised his right hand over his shoulder. Not a wave exactly, not a learned gesture, just a motion. A particular motion, without turning back, and got in. The pickup pulled onto the road. She watched the taillights go around the curve. And then, the hand, his right hand, raised over his shoulder as he walked away, not looking back, but somehow still saying, "I'll see you." Meg stood on the side of Highway 67 in the October wind, and felt something move through her chest like a fault line shifting. She knew that gesture. She had seen it exactly once before in her life, 35 years ago, a night in October. A young man walking away from her across a campus courtyard, his right hand raised over his shoulder as he went, not looking back. And the way she'd stood watching until he disappeared, knowing, even then, that something had just begun. She whispered it to the empty road. "Dean?" The pickup was gone around the curve, gone. Her hands were shaking, not from cold. She stood there a moment longer than made sense. Then she got in the car, and instead of continuing north toward the cemetery, she drove toward Pine Ridge. Pine Ridge was small. Not the quaint small of towns that had been discovered by people from Denver with renovation money. Just small. Main Street had a hardware store, a coffee shop called Carter's, a diner, a church, and a motel with a hand-painted sign, Dawson's. 1978 clean rooms, fair prices. Ruth Dawson was behind the front desk when Meg walked in. 70 maybe. White hair cut short and sensible. An apron with flour on it that she hadn't bothered to remove to work the desk. Eyes that had been looking at people for a long time and knew what they saw. She looked at Meg. "Room 4's available," she said, before Meg had opened her mouth. "Good bed. Window looks at the mountain. Breakfast is at 7, it's included, and it's actual breakfast. Not boxes of cereal." "I haven't said I need a room yet," Meg said. "No," Ruth agreed, "but you've got the look of someone who's going to." Meg looked at her. "The look of someone who came back for a reason," Ruth continued, settling onto her stool, "and hasn't worked up to admitting it yet." Meg was quiet for a moment. "I'll take room 4, she said. She sat on the edge of the bed and looked at the window. The mountain was there, just like Ruth had promised. Brown and gold with the start of October, the ridgeline sharp against an afternoon sky, that Colorado blue she had not seen in 35 years and recognized immediately. She'd been a student at Westfield University, 40 minutes north of Pine Ridge, 23 years old, a scholarship she couldn't afford to lose. Second-hand clothes and a stubbornness that her mother called difficult and her professors called promising, depending on the day. She hadn't been happy, exactly. She'd been something more urgent than happy. Alive, more purely alive than she'd been before or since. Then her brother called on a Thursday night in October, and her mother had a stroke, and Meg had packed one bag and driven home in under an hour. There hadn't been time to think. Her mother. She had to get to her mother. There was one person she had meant to see on Friday. She had not been able to reach him. No cell phones in 1989. No way to leave a message except through a friend in the dorm who turned out not to be reliable. She had meant to come back and explain. She had meant to. But her mother's recovery was slow. And then not a recovery at all. And by the time Meg came back to Westfield the following fall, he was gone. Just gone. His room empty, a different name on the roster. Someone said he'd left for family reasons. No one knew more than that. She had tried to find him, with the tools available in 1990 which were limited. She had asked around, checked the alumni directory twice. Nothing. D. Pruitt, that was all she'd had. First initial, last name, a face she could have described from memory in complete detail. And one note folded into the front cover of her physics textbook. Meet me at the fountain, Friday. She had kept that note. It had never felt possible to throw it away. Now she picked up her phone and typed, Dean Pruitt, Pine Ridge, Colorado. Pruitt's Auto Repair, 214 Main Street, Pine Ridge, CO. She clicked the website, simple, a logo, an address, a phone number, and one photograph. A man standing in front of a garage bay, arms loosely crossed, looking directly at the camera. She looked at that photograph for a long time. Then she reached into her bag and took out the envelope. White, plain, soft with age along the edges. She opened it. Inside one small piece of paper, pale yellow now, the pencil faded to a silvery ghost of its original darkness. Meet me at the fountain, Friday D. And beneath it the photograph, or half a photograph, the edge torn along a ragged line cutting through the middle of the image. Her half showed her at 23. Brown hair, long, glasses she'd given up for contacts at 25. A flannel shirt that had been her brother's before it was hers. She was laughing. Not posed, not for the camera. The kind of laughing that happened when something was actually funny and you weren't ready for it. The torn edge showed the sleeve of an arm, a shoulder, nothing more. She had torn the photograph during a very bad week in 1992, when she had decided with some force that she was going to stop thinking about a person who had clearly moved on, and so should she. She had meant to throw away the whole thing. Instead, she'd torn it in half, kept her half, and spent several minutes staring at the other half before putting it in a separate drawer. She never found the other half again. She never entirely stopped looking. Now she sat with her half of the photograph and looked at the mountain through the window and thought about a man in a faded pickup who had not taken money for 4 minutes of work. She thought about the card she'd handed him. Margaret Harlow, CEO Harlow Properties. She had used her married name for 30 years. It was simply her name now. But once it hadn't been. Once she had been Margaret Hayes, which was the name on the Westfield class roster. The name he would have known. He'd looked at the card. His hand had gone still. She set everything carefully back in the envelope. Lay back on the bed. Stared at the ceiling for a long time. She was 58 years old. She ran a company that employed over 300 people. She had raised a son, buried a husband, rebuilt everything from nothing. And she had not cried in. She tried to count and couldn't. She was not a woman who made impulsive decisions. She picked up her phone and called her assistant. Clear my schedule for the week, she said. A pause. The whole week? You have the Donner meeting on Wednesday and move it. And the board call Thursday? Move it. Silence. Her assistant had worked for her 6 years and had learned not to ask for reasons she didn't volunteer. Done, he said. Anything else? No, a pause. Yes, don't tell Warren. She hung up, then she closed her eyes. And for the first time in a very long time, she did not immediately start thinking about what came next. She was in the breakfast room at 7 sharp the next morning. Ruth set a mug of coffee in front of her without asking. Sleep? Ruth said some. The mountain does that. Keeps people up the first night. The altitude and the quiet working on you at the same time. Ruth refilled her own cup and sat down across from her with the ease of a woman who had no need to be anywhere specific. Where are you from? Phoenix. Originally Wyoming, long way from both. Yes. Meg wrapped her hands around the mug. Ruth. Do you know a man named Dean Pruitt? He runs the auto repair shop on Main Street. Ruth looked at her. The kind of look that already knew something. Dean's been here his whole life, she said. Born and raised, left once, came back. When did he come back? Early 90s. His father's business was failing and his mother needed help. He came home. She set the coffee pot down, stayed because he wanted to, not because he had to. There's a difference, and you can tell it in people. She looked at Meg evenly. He's a good man, has a daughter, Cassie, 14, sharp as a blade, that girl. A pause. He helped me yesterday on Highway 67. Ruth nodded slowly. He would. Dean sees someone needs something, he helps, doesn't make a production of it. She looked at Meg with those long-seeing eyes. Is that the only reason you're asking? Meg looked at her coffee. No, she said. Ruth nodded, as if that was exactly what she'd expected. Breakfast is eggs or pancakes, she said. The eggs are better. The walk down Main Street took 4 minutes. Pruitt's Auto Repair sat between the hardware store and Carter's Coffee. Both garage bays faced the street, open to the October air. Country radio drifted out, low and unhurried. Meg could see him from across the street. He was under a truck, just his boots visible, the practiced horizontal of someone very comfortable in that position. Then the sound of a wrench, movement, and he slid out and stood up in one fluid motion, the way people moved when their bodies still knew exactly what they were doing. He was wiping his hands when she walked in. He saw her, his hands stopped moving. Not dramatically, not for long. Just a half second where everything paused. The way you pause when something arrives that you weren't ready for, and you need a moment to decide how to meet it. Then he continued. Slower, Miss Harlow, he said. Car running okay? The car's fine. Good, the cable should hold. If it gives you more trouble, any shop can replace it in about 20 minutes. That's not why I'm here. He looked at her. Careful. Steady, there's a coffee shop next door, he said. I was about to take a break. He wasn't, she suspected, but he said it, and she took it. All right, she said. They sat outside on the bench in front of Carter's. His coffee was black. Hers had cream. She'd ordered it without thinking and then noticed what she'd done and said nothing about it. She had given up cream years ago. Apparently not entirely. The street was quiet. A dog crossed toward the hardware store with evident purpose. A woman in a red coat went into the diner. The mountains sat at the end of Main Street the way they always had. Enormous. Permanent, faintly amused by everything beneath them. She said it before she could organize it into something more careful. Westfield University, 1989. She looked at her coffee, the fountain in front of Morrison Hall. Silence. She made herself look at him. His face had changed. The professional composure, the polite competence he'd worn since she walked in, had gone somewhere else. What was underneath it was harder to read. Older. Like a room you hadn't been in for a long time. He set his coffee down, reached into his breast pocket. He took out her business card, set it on the bench between them. Margaret Harlow. CEO Harlow Properties. Harlow, he said. That's your married name, not a question. Your name was Hayes. The way he said it, just the name, Hayes. Like something he'd been carrying that he didn't know he was still carrying. Dean, she said. Something crossed his face. Something that had been held very still for a long time and was now, briefly, not still. Margaret Hayes, he said quietly. She hadn't heard that name in 30 years. The weight of it landing in her chest was something she hadn't prepared for. I go by Meg, she said, because she didn't know what else to say. He was quiet. The country radio from the garage drifted across the street, something slow and steel guitar. A door somewhere on the block opened and closed. Then he said it, even, flat, like a fact being reported. I waited 4 hours. At that fountain, she felt the words go through her like cold water. Not because she hadn't known. She had known, had understood, had imagined it countless times over 35 years. But hearing it said, by him, in his actual voice. 4 hours, it's all right, he picked up his coffee. It was a long time ago, he wasn't angry. That was somehow the worst part. He was saying it the way you stated something that had long since finished hurting, processed, set aside, lived with, until it became just a thing that had happened. Which meant he'd had to live with it. For 35 years. She opened her mouth, to explain. To start somewhere. My mother, the phone call, I tried to reach you. I came back and you were gone. I should get back, he said. He'd stood, looked down at her for a moment with those careful eyes. It's good to see you, he said. Simply. Like he meant it. Like it cost him something to mean it, and then he walked back across the street. She sat on the bench in front of Carter's Coffee in Pine Ridge, Colorado, with a coffee she'd ordered with cream for the first time in years, and watched the door of Pruitt's auto close behind a man she had never entirely stopped thinking about. The mountains were at the end of the street. The dog returned from the hardware store apparently satisfied. Meg sat very still. She was not going to cry on a bench in a town she hadn't visited since 1989. She was 58 years old and she ran a company and she did not cry on benches. She drank her coffee. She thought about what she was going to say. She had time to figure it out. Because she was not leaving Pine Ridge today. She was not leaving tomorrow either. She went back to Dawson's and booked room 4 through the end of the week. She stayed. That was the decision. No grand reasoning. No spreadsheet of pros and cons. She called Warren's assistant instead of Warren, moved everything that could be moved, and told Ruth Dawson she'd need the room through Sunday. Ruth said, "I'll put fresh towels in," no other comment. Which was exactly right. The thing about a small town is that it doesn't accommodate avoidance. In Phoenix, Meg could go 3 days without seeing the same face twice. The city was enormous and indifferent, and you could disappear into it completely if you needed to. Pine Ridge had one main street, one coffee shop, one hardware store, one auto repair, and Dean Pruitt was woven into all of it, the way people who truly belonged somewhere became part of the texture of the place. His truck was parked outside Carter's at 7:15 every morning. His name came up in conversations she wasn't part of. Ruth mentioned him without being asked. The man at the hardware store mentioned him when Meg bought batteries for her travel clock. The woman at the diner counter said, without context, "Dean fixed my water heater last spring. Wouldn't take a dime for the labor." She wasn't asking about him. She didn't have to. He was just there. The way the mountains were there. Permanent. Load-bearing. Part of the architecture of the place. He didn't avoid her either. That was the thing she noticed on day 2, and then day 3, and then recognized as a pattern. He didn't cross the street when he saw her coming. Didn't suddenly become very interested in whatever was behind him. He acknowledged her the way he acknowledged most things. A nod. A small, careful version of a smile. The specific courtesy of a man who had decided to be decent about something that wasn't entirely easy. It should have been less maddening than it was. She wanted him to be something she could work with. Guarded, maybe. Cold. Or the opposite, open, willing, the kind of man who wore his feelings plainly and made everything simple. He was neither. He was measured, like he'd done some internal accounting a long time ago, and arrived at a number he was comfortable with. And he was not in a hurry to revisit the math. She found that deeply inconvenient. On Tuesday morning over breakfast, Ruth said, "You know what I've learned in 70 years? Meg looked up from her eggs. People don't fall apart because of the big dramatic moments. Ruth poured coffee without being asked. They fall apart because of all the small things they never said. All the explanations they kept meaning to give. She set the pot down. Silence is the most expensive thing in the world, honey. It costs you everything. Ruth went back to the kitchen. Meg sat with that for a while. She thought about a Thursday night in October 1989. A phone call. Her hand on a dorm room door. She'd been about to leave, coat already on, about to walk to the fountain where she was supposed to meet him. And the phone ringing and her brother's voice saying Mom had a stroke. And the choice that wasn't a choice at all. Just her mother. She had to get to her mother. She had not said goodbye to anyone. There hadn't been time. She had meant to come back and explain. The cost of not doing that was 35 years. Ruth was right. It was the most expensive thing in the world. The shift, if you could call it that, came on Tuesday afternoon. Ruth's station wagon made a sound that Ruth described with some drama, as a grinding and then a clunk, and then the radio started playing a station it's never played. She said this to Meg over the breakfast dishes, not looking for anything in particular, just reporting the facts. "I'll ask Dean to look at it," Meg said. She hadn't planned to say that. She said it anyway. And that was how she ended up in the parking lot of Dawson's Motel at 2 in the afternoon, holding a flashlight while Dean lay mostly under Ruth's station wagon with the practiced ease of someone for whom the underside of vehicles held no mysteries. He hadn't asked her to hold the flashlight. She just picked it up off the ground where he'd set it and held it steady where he was working. He'd noticed, adjusted the angle of what he was doing to make use of the light, said nothing about it. They worked like that for a while. Her holding, him fixing. The October wind moving through the cottonwoods at the edge of the parking lot with a sound like something being gently rearranged. Brake caliper, he said finally. I can order the part. 2 days, maybe 3, that fast? Supplier in Durango. He's reliable. He slid partway out and looked up at her from the ground. You held that pretty steady. I fixed my own bike until I was 16, she said. We couldn't afford a mechanic. He looked at her for a moment. Something shifted in his expression, not dramatically, not with any announcement. Just a small recalibration. Like a scale that had been slightly off and was now level. He sat up, reached for the rag he'd left on the bumper. Where'd you grow up? Laramie, Wyoming, huh? This long way from Phoenix. A long way from a lot of things. He looked at her. She looked at him. The cottonwoods moved. Somewhere down the street a door opened and closed. Coffee? She said. And he thought about it for exactly 1 second too long. Yeah, he said. All right, they went to Carter's. His coffee was black. She ordered hers with cream again without deciding to. She'd stopped pretending she wasn't going to do that. This time they sat inside at a corner table. The afternoon was cooling fast and the wind had picked up. Through the window she could see his truck in front of the garage. The mountains rising behind Main Street, the aspens on the lower slopes going gold. He talked about Pine Ridge the way people talked about places they'd chosen. There was a difference between that and people who were simply stuck. She'd known enough of both to recognize which was which. You left once, she said. Ruth mentioned for college. He turned his mug. Didn't finish. She knew why. She didn't say she knew why. Not yet. And you came back. My father's business was failing. My mother needed help. Simple. No resentment in it. No self-pity either. So I came back and I helped. Then she got better and I was already here and... He shrugged. I'd missed it when I was gone. Didn't know how much until I came back. Meg looked at her coffee. I've lived in 4 states. I've never once missed any of them. He looked at her. That's a lonesome thing to say. It's just true. Lonesome things can be true. She looked up. He was watching her with an expression that wasn't pitying, wasn't sympathetic in the easy surface way, just present. Like he was actually looking at her. Like she was a person and not a title or a balance sheet. She had forgotten how unsettling that was. How rare it was. And how much she had missed it without knowing she was missing it. Ruth's voice drifted from somewhere near the counter, where she was doing something that probably didn't need doing. More coffee? Neither of them answered. Ruth smiled at whatever she was pretending to wipe down and kept wiping. Cassie Pruitt appeared for the first time on Wednesday afternoon. Meg was at the corner table with her laptop, genuinely working. A lease review that Warren had forwarded with the subject line, "When you have a moment," which in Warren language meant, "Please do this immediately." When the bell above Carter's door rang and a girl walked in with the authority of someone who owned the place. 14 years old, dark brown hair in a messy braid, a backpack with a dinosaur patch and 3 keychains that clattered when she moved. Jeans with a hole in the left knee that was not fashionable, just a hole. She went around the room in one glance and her eyes landed on Meg with complete unself-conscious assessment. She came directly over, sat down across from Meg without being invited. "You're the broken car lady," she said. "That's me. Dad told me about you." She tilted her head. "Not a lot. Just that you had a broken car and you gave him a business card." "That's accurate." He put the card on the refrigerator. Meg went very still. "Did he?" "Yeah." Cassie unwrapped a granola bar, with the focus of someone dealing with a genuine engineering problem. "He never puts things on the refrigerator. Just my drawings and my report cards." She looked up. So Meg looked at this 14-year-old girl who had her father's steady eyes and apparently his complete absence of pretense. "So," Meg agreed. "Why are you still here?" Not rude, just direct, terrifyingly direct. Meg considered several answers, dismissed them all. "I owe your father an explanation," she said. "I'm about 35 years late giving it." Cassie chewed her granola bar. Considered this with genuine seriousness. "That's a long time to be late." "Yes. Were you late a lot?" "Growing, no," Meg said. "Almost never." "Then this must have been a pretty big explanation." "The biggest," Meg said. Cassie looked at her for another moment. Then she pulled a math textbook from her backpack, set it on the table and opened it. Uncapped a pen. "I have homework," she said. "You can keep sitting there if you want." And that apparently was that. Meg looked at the girl for a moment. This daughter who had her father's directness and her father's refusal to perform anything. And then she opened her laptop and went back to the lease review. They worked in companionable silence for 40 minutes. When Cassie left, she said, "See you tomorrow, probably." She didn't ask, just stated it. "Probably," Meg agreed. Cassie walked out. The keychains on her backpack clattered as the door swung shut behind her. Meg sat for a moment after she was gone. She was smiling. She noticed that with some surprise. A real smile. Not the professional version, not the version she used in boardrooms and charity dinners. The other kind. She couldn't remember the last time she'd smiled like that without meaning to. The days settled into something. Not an arrangement, nothing was planned. It just happened, the way water finds a level without being told to. Meg worked in the mornings. Real work, lease reviews, property assessments. 2 calls with Warren that she kept to exactly 30 minutes each, which Warren found suspicious but didn't question. She noticed, thinking more clearly than she had in months, maybe longer. There was something about the altitude and the quiet. The absence of the specific hum of Phoenix that she'd stopped hearing years ago and only recognized now that it was gone. The afternoons were different. Ruth's station wagon needed a follow-up check on Thursday. The brake caliper part arrived from Durango. Dean came to install it. Meg was already in the parking lot when he pulled up, reading on the bench by the door. She hadn't arranged that, she'd simply been there. He glanced at her when he got out, said nothing, got his tools. "Hand me the torque wrench," he said 20 minutes in. She looked at the toolbox, found it, handed it over. "You know what a torque wrench is," he said. "I told you. 16 years of bike maintenance, that's not the same thing." "No," she agreed. "But the principle translates." He looked at her sideways. Not quite smiling, but close. They worked like that for another half hour. Her handing things when he asked. Him not explaining what he was doing, because she didn't need him to. The cottonwoods turning color around the edges of the parking lot. When he was done, he stood and looked at the wagon, with the satisfaction of someone who had fixed a thing properly. Not pride, just satisfaction. The clean feeling of work done right. Ruth should get another 4 or 5 years out of this, he said. "She'll outlast the car," Meg said. He looked at her. "Yeah," he said, "probably." And then, almost to himself, "She outlasts most things." He packed his tools. Meg walked with him to the truck without deciding to. They stood on the sidewalk for a moment. "There's a place up on the Ridge Road," he said. "Overlook. You can see most of the valley from up there. Nice in the evenings this time of year." He said it to the truck, not quite to her. "Maybe I'll drive up sometime," she said. "It's about 4 miles past the Carter's turnoff. Can't miss it." He got in the truck. He drove away without looking back. Meg stood on the sidewalk and looked at the mountains and thought, he just told me where to find him this evening. She went upstairs and changed her shoes. She drove to the overlook. He was already there, leaning against the hood of his truck. Not surprised to see her. Not performing unsurprise either. Just there, the way he was always just there. They stood and looked at the valley as the sun went behind the ridge, and the light turned everything amber and then rose and then a deep, particular gold that lasted about 20 minutes and was flawless the entire time. They didn't say much, they didn't need to. He told her about Cassie's current theory that marine biology was the correct career path. Before that it was forensic anthropologist. Before that, train conductor. The train conductor phase lasted a while, he said. "I thought we were going to have to seriously commit to that one." What changed her mind? She saw a documentary about whales. Meg laughed, surprised out of her. The kind of laugh that had nothing to do with politeness and everything to do with something landing exactly right. He looked at her when she laughed, the way someone looked when they heard a sound they weren't sure they'd ever hear. She looked away at the valley. He talked about Cassie's mother once, not at length, not to explain or relitigate. Just a fact about his life that came up when you were talking to someone long enough. Cassie's mother left when she was 3, he said. The gold light was fading to gray by then. Linda lives in Denver now. Different life. Does Cassie see her? Sometimes it's complicated for Cassie. A pause. Linda's not a bad person. She tried to want what we had and she couldn't. Eventually she was honest about it. He was quiet for a moment. I think that took courage. What it did to Cassie, that I'm still angry about. But those are 2 different things. Meg sat with that. She thought about the distinction he was drawing between the choice and the damage the choice caused. Holding both without collapsing them into one judgment. She hadn't thought that carefully about her own grief in years. She'd been too busy running from it. I confused being needed with being loved, she said. It came out before she'd shaped it, just true and out. He looked at her. For a long time, she said, I built the company large enough that no one could stop needing me. And I mistook that for being loved. And by the time I understood the difference, she stopped, looked at the darkening valley. Robert was gone, and I just kept building. He didn't say anything, which was exactly right. He didn't reach for a response or a comfort or a lesson. He just let it be what it was. That's not nothing, though, he said finally. What you built? No, she agreed. It's just not everything. The sky above the ridge went from rose to violet to the deep, enormous dark of Colorado at elevation. Stars came up one at a time, then all at once. They stood there until the cold made it unreasonable to stay. He walked her to her car. Breakfast tomorrow, he said. Ruth's making French toast. She makes that when she's pleased about something. Is she pleased often? Not especially. He looked at the sky. Must be a good week. He walked back to his truck. Meg got in her car and sat for a moment in the dark. She was 58 years old. Standing on a ridge in Colorado. Smiling at a steering wheel. She drove back to Dawson's. Warren arrived on Thursday. Meg had felt it coming the way you felt weather. A certain pressure in her phone calls with him, a too careful quality to his questions. He pulled up in a rental car at 10 in the morning, pressed khakis, a jacket too light for October in Colorado. He stood on Main Street and looked at Pine Ridge the way people looked at places they didn't understand. He was 35. He had Robert's coloring and Meg's jaw, and his own particular quality of being simultaneously the most capable person in any room and quietly, genuinely uncertain whether he deserved to be. She had given him that uncertainty. She knew it. She had modeled a version of success that never stopped, never rested, never admitted doubt, and he had learned from it. Had learned to hide uncertainty behind efficiency, behind forward motion. She saw it so clearly now from this distance. They had dinner at the diner. He talked about the Donner meeting, which had gone fine, the quarterly numbers, which were good, a board member who was being difficult, which was manageable. Meg listened, asked the right questions. She was still herself, still capable, still interested, still running the thing she'd built. But she was also watching him, the way he ate without looking at his food, the way he glanced at his phone twice and put it away each time with visible effort. The way he talked about the company, the way someone talked about a language they'd worked very hard to learn and were only now realizing they'd also begun to dream in. You're good at this, she said. He looked up. The company. You've been doing half of it already, Warren. You know that. He set his fork down. Mum, I'm not dying, I'm not quitting. She looked at him steadily. I'm just saying. You're ready, you have been for a while. He was quiet for a moment. Then why haven't you? Because I didn't know what I'd do if I let go of some of it. Honest. The most honest she'd been with him in years. I didn't know who I was if I wasn't running at full speed. He looked at his plate, then back up. Are you figuring it out? She thought about the overlook. The stars coming up one at a time. A man in a flannel shirt who didn't need to fill silence. I think so, she said. He met Dean the next morning, accidentally or Ruth arranged, which amounted to the same thing. Warren was getting coffee at Carter's. Dean was there. Ruth introduced them with the calm authority of someone managing a situation she'd been expecting. Warren shook Dean's hand, smiled, said it was good to meet him, polite. He was always polite, but Meg, watching from 3 feet away, saw it. The look. Down and up, flannel shirt, jeans with the faded crease, hands that had never held a briefcase. The assessment that Warren didn't know he was making, because he'd been raised in a world where it was automatic. The look that asked without words, is this man enough of something? Dean noticed. Of course he did. He noticed everything with those quiet eyes. He just didn't react. He nodded once, said it was good to meet Warren, and poured his coffee. Warren was polite. That was never the issue. But Cassie had been in the corner doing homework on a laptop, and Cassie saw it too. She looked at Warren, then at Dean, then back at her laptop. Her jaw set just slightly, her father's jaw on a smaller face. She didn't say anything, but she filed it away. Meg would find out later what Cassie did with what she'd seen. That was Saturday. First, there was Friday night. Dean knocked on the door of room 4 at 9:15. She knew it was him before she opened it. She couldn't have said how, just she knew. He stood in the hallway, same flannel, different jeans, hands in his pockets. Looking like a man who had driven somewhere he wasn't entirely sure he should have come. I want to know, he said. What happened? That Friday. He didn't look away. I think I've earned that. She stepped back from the door. He came in. She didn't offer coffee. He didn't want coffee. They both knew that. They sat. She on the edge of the bed, he in the chair by the window. The mountain was visible through the glass, dark and enormous against the October night. The town was quiet around them. The particular quiet of a small place after 9, when everyone was inside and the dark was complete. She told him. Everything. In order, no softening. Her brother's voice on the phone. Mom had a stroke, her hand on the dorm room door, coat already on, ready to leave, ready to walk to the fountain, and the phone. And then the choice that wasn't a choice. Her mother. She had to get to her mother, the drive home. 6 hours, the hospital, her mother's face. Small, the machines, the sound of them. Then 7, her mother recovering, then not fully. Daily things, ongoing things. Her scholarship with a grace period but not an indefinite one. And by the time she came back to Westfield the following fall, you were gone, she said. Your room was empty, a different name on the door. She looked at her hands. I only knew your first initial and your last name from the class roster. D. Pruitt. And Colorado is a large state. She paused. I tried with what there was to try with in 1990. I asked around. The alumni directory. Twice. Nothing. She reached into her bag, took out the envelope, set the folded note on the bed between them. Meet me at the fountain. Friday. He looked at it for a long moment. Then he said the thing she had not been expecting. I know. She looked up. I know you didn't come because you chose not to. He said it carefully. Like something that had been held a long time and needed to be set down gently. About 2 years after I left, I ran into someone who'd been in your dorm. She mentioned your mother, the stroke, you leaving in a hurry. He looked at the note. By then I'd already spent a long time being angry, and then I felt like an idiot for being angry at the wrong thing. He turned the mug he wasn't holding, a habit, a gesture, and then I saw your wedding announcement in the alumni newsletter. 1993. A pause. I thought, she's built her life. Let it be. Meg stared at him. You knew, she said. You've known for 30-some years that I didn't leave on purpose. Yes, the room was very quiet. Dean. She couldn't find the rest of it. Knowing doesn't fix things, he said. Not hard. Not bitter. Just true, the way he said everything. It just makes the loss more exact. You know precisely what was lost instead of being able to wonder. He looked at her. I used to think wondering was worse. Now I think knowing was harder. She sat with that. The mountain outside. The silence of the town around them. I'm sorry, she said, for not finding a way, for not trying harder. She meant it past the bone. I know your mother was sick. I know you had to leave, and I am still sorry that I didn't. You were taking care of yours, he said. I know, and I'm still sorry. He nodded, accepting it without dismissing it, without saying it's fine, because they both understood it wasn't fine. It had been 35 years of not fine, and saying so didn't require blame. It just required honesty. She looked at him. What happened to you? After you left, he was quiet a moment. My father's business needed someone to run it. Then my mother's health needed someone to manage. I came home. A pause. Started working at Jim Dawson's garage, Ruth's husband, before he passed. Learned the trade properly. Eventually took over my own place. He looked at his hands. Married Linda. Had Cassie. Built what I built. He paused. It's a good life. I mean that without qualification. I know you do. It's just not. He stopped. Not finished, but done. She understood. Some sentences ended not with words but with the thing both people already knew. It's just not the one I imagined once. The one that had a different night in October at the beginning of it. A fountain, a Friday, a girl who had shown up. They sat in the quiet for a while longer. Not uncomfortable. Not resolved either. Just two people at the end of a long road, sitting with a distance they'd covered. Finally he stood, moved toward the door. Breakfast tomorrow, he said. Breakfast tomorrow, she said. He paused at the door. And she saw him consider it. That gesture, the hand over the shoulder. She saw him think about it and then not do it. He turned instead and met her eyes directly. Good night, Meg, he said. Good night, Dean. He went out. The door closed behind him. She sat for a long time after. Then she reached for the envelope, put the note back inside, and set it on the nightstand where she could see it. And for the first time in 35 years, it didn't feel like something she was keeping. It felt like something that had finally been returned. She woke Saturday to frost on the window. The first real frost of October. The mountain was white at the upper elevations, just the top third, and the rest of it was gold and brown and standing there the way it always stood, like it had something to say and was in no hurry to say it. Meg lay still for a moment, listened to Pine Ridge waking up, a truck on Main Street, the sound of Ruth's kitchen starting, the particular clatter of a woman who cooked with conviction. Somewhere outside, a bird she couldn't name was doing something persistent in the cottonwoods. She'd slept. Actually slept. 6 hours without waking, which hadn't happened in longer than she could reliably remember. She got up and stood at the window with her coffee and looked at the frost and didn't think about anything in particular. That was new too, the not thinking. She had spent so many years filling every quiet moment with the next decision, the next problem, the next thing that needed managing, that simply standing at a window with coffee and looking at a frosty mountain felt almost transgressive. Like playing hooky from a job she'd never agreed to take. She was still standing there when the knock came. Light, specific. Not Ruth's knock, which was 2 quick raps, and then the door was already opening. She opened the door. Cassie stood in the hallway in her coat, backpack over one shoulder, holding something wrapped in a paper bag. "Dad's at the shop," Cassie said. "He doesn't know I'm here." "Okay," Meg said. "Can I come in?" Meg stepped back. Cassie came in, looked around room 4 with the calm assessment of someone inspecting a property, and sat down in the chair by the window. The chair Dean had sat in the night before. She set the paper bag on her knees. "My mom left when I was 3, she said. No preamble, no warming up." Meg sat on the edge of the bed and said nothing, because nothing was what was needed. "I don't remember her," Cassie continued. "Not really. I have one memory that might be real and might be something I made up from a photograph. I can't tell anymore." She looked at the bag on her knees. "Dad never says anything bad about her. Not once. Not even when I've been really angry and kind of wanted him to. Why do you think he doesn't?" Cassie considered this seriously. "Ruth told me once that he decided whatever happened between them was his to carry. Not mine." She looked up. "I used to think that was just him being patient. But I think now it was him deciding on purpose. Like it was a choice he made every day." Meg looked at this 14-year-old girl sitting in the chair with her paper bag and her braid and her very old eyes. "That's a hard thing to understand," Meg said. "I'm pretty good at hard things," Cassie said. "Not bragging, just accurate. I've had practice." She unwrapped the paper bag. Inside was a ceramic mug. Hand-thrown, slightly uneven. The déglaze a deep ocean blue with something around the rim that might have been waves or might have been the outline of mountains, depending on how you looked at it. It was heavy. Solid, beautiful in the way handmade things were beautiful, not perfect, but deliberate, every imperfection a decision. Cassie held it out. "Art class," she said. "We had to make something for someone, a present." She looked at the mug and then at Meg. "I was going to make it for Dad, but then I thought you needed it more." Meg took the mug. She turned it in her hands. The glaze caught the morning light through the window and turned it into something else entirely. "Cassie," she said. "It holds about 12 ounces, Cassie said. "I know that's probably less than you drink, but the clay can only—" "Cassie." The girl stopped. "This is the most beautiful thing anyone has given me in a very long time," Meg said. Cassie looked at the mug, then at Meg, then briefly at the window. "Okay," she said quietly. "Good." Then she straightened, crossed her ankles, looked at Meg directly with those steady gray eyes that were her father's eyes on a younger face. "If you're going to leave," she said, "tell me now. I can handle it. I've handled things before." Her jaw set slightly. "But he can't. Not again. He acts like he's fine. He's very good at acting like he's fine. But I know what fine actually looks like on him, and it doesn't look like this week." Meg sat very still. "Cassie, I'm not asking you to stay. I'm not asking you anything." The girl's voice was even, careful. The voice of someone who had learned early to keep feelings in their proper containers. "I'm just saying, if you're going to go, tell me now. So I can. So I know." Meg looked at her for a long moment. At this girl who had been learning since she was 3 years old to read the space between what people said and what they meant. Who had built herself into someone clear-eyed and direct and fiercely, quietly protective of the one person she had. Not because she'd been asked to, but because love made you do that. Love made you stand in doorways and say hard things, and hold paper bags containing handmade mugs, and try to protect people from the specific kind of loss you already knew the shape of. I'm not leaving because I don't want to stay, Meg said, carefully. True all the way down. The only question is whether your father will let me. Cassie looked at her for a long moment. The frost on the window behind her, the mountain beyond that. Then, she said, I'll work on that. She stood up, repacked the paper bag. The mug was already in Meg's hands, so she just folded the paper and put it in her backpack. She moved toward the door, stopped, turned back. He made French toast this morning, she said. For himself, he never makes French toast. He says it's too much trouble for one person. She left. The door clicked shut. Meg sat with the ocean blue mug in both hands and looked at the mountain through the window and stayed very still for a long time. Then she heard Warren's door, 2 rooms down, open and close. She'd almost forgotten Warren was still here. She set the mug on the nightstand, got up, knocked on his door. He answered in yesterday's clothes. He'd been up, she could tell. His hair slightly off from running his hands through it, the look of a man who'd been thinking rather than sleeping. Morning, he said. She looked at him. You okay? Yeah, I just. He stepped back from the door. She came in. His room was tidier than hers. Warren was always tidy, even in hotel rooms, a habit she'd never had to teach him. He'd simply arrived in the world that way, organized and careful, as if he'd understood from the beginning that order was the first defense against chaos. On the small table by the window, next to his laptop and a folder of documents, sat a plain white envelope. Meg looked at it. Her envelope, her half of the photograph, the note. She had left it on the table in her room the night before when she'd put it back inside after Dean had gone. She was certain she had. She looked at Warren. You went in my room, she said, not accusing, just clarifying. Your door was open. He looked at the envelope. I saw it on the table. I picked it up and I looked. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have. It's all right. No, he said, it's not. It's your private. He stopped. Sat down on the edge of the bed. Mom, that photograph. She came and sat in the chair across from him. Who is she? He said. And then immediately, I know who she is. I know it's you. But I don't know that person. Meg looked at the envelope on the table. She's who I was before everything else started, she said. Before Dad? Before everything. She was quiet a moment. Before the company, before marriage. Before I learned that being useful was a way of making sure no one left. She looked at her son. Before I confused those two things. Warren looked at the envelope, then at her. His face was doing something complicated. The careful restructuring of a picture he'd thought was complete, and was now understanding had a missing piece. You looked happy, he said in the photo. I've seen a lot of pictures of you. From before I was born, from when I was little, from all of it. And I've never seen you look like that. Like what? Like you weren't thinking about anything except that exact moment. He looked at his hands. I didn't know you could do that. I didn't either, she said. Not for a long time. He was quiet for a moment. Outside, Main Street was starting its Saturday. The hardware store opening, the sound of Carter's coffee grinder starting up, a car pulling into the lot across the street. Is it him? Warren said, tilting his head in the general direction of Main Street. Of Pruitt's Auto. Meg looked at her son. This man who ran her company and worried about her and called too often and had never once, not in 35 years of being her son, seen her the way Cassie had seen her. Not because he was cold, not because he didn't love her, but because she had never shown him how. She had shown him capable. She had shown him driven. She had shown him how to outrun grief and turn loss into productivity, and never, ever sit still long enough to want something just for yourself. She had not shown him this. Yes, she said. It's him. Warren nodded. Once. He picked up the envelope and handed it to her carefully, the way you handed something back when you understood, belatedly, what it was. I looked at that photo for a long time last night, he said, and I kept thinking I never knew her. That woman. And she was my mother the whole time. He paused. I think I've been running the company your way because it was the only version of you I knew how to be. Meg looked at him. Warren, you should go back, he said, quietly, firmly, in the voice he used when he'd already thought something through completely and arrived somewhere he was sure of. To whatever this is. Give it the chance it didn't get the first time. He met her eyes. I can run Phoenix. I've been ready for 2 years. You just never quite moved out of the way. That's probably fair, she said. It's completely fair. He almost smiled. I'm not saying it to make you feel bad. I'm saying it because it's true, and because you need to hear it from someone who loves you. She looked at her son, this capable, careful, quietly uncertain man she had made. I love you, she said. I love you too. He picked up his phone, looked at his calendar with the focused efficiency of someone already pivoting. I'll change my flight to tomorrow morning. Give us today. She stood, picked up the envelope, held it for a moment. She thought about Cassie saying, I'll work on that. She thought about Dean's voice the night before. Knowing doesn't fix things. She thought about Ruth. Silence is the most expensive thing in the world. Breakfast? She said. Warren looked up. Is it French toast? Apparently that's what happens when Ruth's pleased about something. He stood. Then yes, she had one more day. Sunday in Pine Ridge in October was a specific and unrepeatable thing. The light came in at an angle that didn't exist in Phoenix, a low considered light that took its time with everything it touched. The aspens along the ridge road had gone fully gold, and in the morning they caught the sun and held it, 1,000 small fires in the tree line. Warren left after breakfast. She walked him to the rental car. He hugged her on the sidewalk, longer than usual, which was not a Warren thing, and which told her more than anything he'd said the day before. Call me, he said. I'll call you when something needs calling about. That's not the same thing. No, she agreed. But it's a start. He drove away. She watched the car go, and then she stood on the sidewalk in the October light and let herself be still for a moment. She spent Sunday the way the town spent it. Slowly. She walked the ridge road in the afternoon alone through the gold aspens. She sat on the overlook for an hour without going anywhere or deciding anything. She had dinner at the diner and talked to Ruth about the history of Pine Ridge, which was longer and stranger than she'd expected. A mining town once, then a ranching town, then nothing much, then slowly a town again, built back by people who'd chosen to stay rather than leave. The ones who stayed built something, Ruth said. The ones who left built something somewhere else. Neither one is wrong. She looked at Meg over her coffee cup. The question is just which kind of person you are, and most people don't find out until they're tested. Dean stopped by Carter's in the late afternoon, sat across from her for 40 minutes. They talked about Cassie's marine biology phase, which had apparently progressed to the point where she'd requested specific books on cetacean communication. They talked about the Ridge Road in winter, which Dean said was something else entirely. A different mountain, a different kind of beautiful, the kind that required more of you. They talked about small things. The comfortable small things of two people who had crossed a threshold and were now on the other side of it, where there was no longer any need to be careful. You're leaving tomorrow? He said. I wasn't planning to, he looked at her. Not yet, she said. He nodded. Set his cup down. Cassie wants to know if you'll be here for the school soccer game next Saturday. I'll try, she said. She'll hold you to that. I'm counting on it. He walked her back to Dawson's in the early dark. They stood on the sidewalk for a moment. The same sidewalk, the same October night. But everything different now in the way places changed when the thing that happened in them changed what you carried. Good night, he said. Good night, Dean. He walked back toward the garage. She watched him go. She did not call out. Did not find a reason to extend the moment. She just watched him and felt the rightness of it, the specific, unflashy rightness of knowing where someone was and knowing they would still be there tomorrow. She went inside and slept better than she had in years. The phone rang at 6:47 Monday morning. Warren's voice had that quality she recognized. Controlled, careful. The voice he used when something was genuinely wrong and he was managing the delivery. The Kellerman contract, he said. There's a zoning issue. Legal flagged it late last night. If we don't get in front of it in the next 48 hours, the whole thing could unwind. Meg sat up. The mountain in the window, still dark at the edges. How bad? Bad enough that I need you here. Not on a call. Here she closed her eyes. 1 second, too. I'll be there by tonight, she said. She hung up and sat in the quiet for a moment. Then she got up and packed the way she always packed. Efficient, everything in its place. The envelope went in last into the inner pocket of her bag, where it always went. The ocean blue mug she wrapped in a sweater and set on top of everything else. She knocked on the door of Pruitt's auto at 7:15. He was already there. Of course he was. He looked at her face when she appeared in the doorway and knew before she spoke. How long? He said. I don't know. A week, maybe less. He nodded, set down the wrench he'd been holding. It's not a choice, she said. There's a problem that needs me specifically. Warren can do most of it. He can't do this part yet. I know, he said. You don't need to explain. I want to explain. He looked at her. I know that too. She looked at him across the garage floor. The morning light coming in through the open bay, the October cold at the edges of it. His hands at his sides. That steadiness that was not resignation and not indifference, but something she was still finding words for. Not disappearing, she said. Not this time. He held her gaze. I know, Dean. Say something that isn't I know. He was quiet a moment, then come back. 2 words, no conditions attached, no time frame, no requests or requirements or negotiations. Just come back. I will, she said. She drove down Highway 67. In the rearview mirror, Pine Ridge got small. The mountains stayed big. The October light was doing that thing. The gold that only lasted 20 minutes and was perfect the whole time. She watched it until the road curved. Then she drove south. Phoenix was loud. She'd stopped hearing it years ago. But she heard it now. The freeway, the recycled air of the office building, the specific ambient hum of a city that didn't understand quiet and had never needed to. Her office was on the 14th floor. Floor-to-ceiling windows looking out over the desert in every direction. Copper and enormous and flat. Everything here was flat. She sat down at her desk. The Kellerman file was waiting. Legal had flagged 6 pages. Warren had flagged 3 more and left a note in the margin of the first one that said simply, "This is above my pay grade right now. It won't be in 2 years." She read that note twice. Then she called her assistant in. "Can you get me cream for this coffee?" He blinked. Of course. He'd been bringing her black coffee for 6 years. He didn't say that. He just went and got the cream. She opened the file. The Kellerman problem was real. The kind of problem that required 20 years of knowing exactly which calls to make, and in what order, and Warren was 35 and he didn't have those 20 years yet. So she made the calls, in order, with the precision of someone for whom this had long since become reflex. By Wednesday evening the zoning issue was manageable. By Thursday afternoon it was resolved. Warren stood in her office doorway at 5. "That's it," he said. "The whole thing. Yes, that took you 3 days. It would have taken 2 if the county assessor kept better hours." He looked at her. That recalibrating look, the one he'd had since Pine Ridge, since the photograph. "I could have done it," he said. Slower. "But I could have. Yes, so you didn't need to come back." She looked at her son. "You called me." I panicked. He put his hands in his pockets. "I'm not used to you not being in the building. I don't know how to calibrate without you here." He paused. "I think I've been using your presence as a substitute for confidence. Which is, I know that's my problem, not yours." She looked at him for a long moment. "You're going to be exceptional at this," she said. "Not adequate, not competent, exceptional. But not while I'm standing between you and every hard decision." She leaned back in her chair. "I've been doing that. Not because I don't trust you. Because I didn't know what I was without it." He looked at the window. The flat copper desert. Then back at her. "Are you going back?" he said. She had not said it out loud to anyone yet. But she knew. She'd known since she turned onto Highway 67 and felt the road change under her. "Yes," she said. "The Denver office has been underused," he said. It came out of him almost immediately, like he'd been thinking about it since Saturday. "If you wanted a base closer to everything, Denver to Pine Ridge is 3 hours on a good road." She looked at him. "You seem to like driving now," he said, and there it was, almost a smile. A real one. "I'll think about it," she said. She wasn't thinking about it, she'd already decided. She'd decided on the mountain road with the frost on the aspens and a ceramic mug wrapped in a sweater at the top of her bag. She called Dean that night. Not because she'd promised, though she had. Because 4 days of not calling had become physically uncomfortable in a way that told her something she already knew. He picked up on the second ring, Meg, just her name, no performance of surprise, no performance of anything. "Just you. The problem solved. I'm coming back." A pause. She heard the garage in the background. The faint sound of something settling into place. "When?" he said. "Saturday. All right, a beat. Cassie made something. She already gave it to me." "Oh," another pause. "What was it?" "She told you not to look." "She told me not to look at whatever she was making. She didn't say I couldn't ask afterward." "A mug," Meg said. "Ocean blue. It's the most beautiful thing I own." Silence for a moment. Not empty silence, the kind with something in it. "She didn't tell me she was going to give it to you," he said. "I know. She must have decided that on her own." "I know that too." He was quiet. She could almost hear him with it, the knowledge of his daughter making a decision like that. choosing Meg for something she'd made with her hands and her time, and whatever 14-year-olds put into the things they made when they were trying to say something they didn't have words for yet. "Dean," she said. "Yeah, I'll be there Saturday." "I'll be here," he said. 2 words she was starting to understand the full weight of. Not a promise made easily, not a small thing. From a man who had learned that people left and had stayed anyway, and had kept the door of the garage open every morning because that was who he was. "I'll be here" was everything. "I know," she said. She hung up, sat in her apartment, the large, quiet, perfectly decorated apartment, and looked at the Phoenix skyline. All that glass, all that ambitious reaching toward a sky that was too bright and too certain of itself. She went to pack. She was already mostly packed. She'd never really unpacked. She drove back Saturday morning. Same road. Different direction. And different in the way roads were different when you were going towards something instead of away from it. The desert giving way to elevation. The pines appearing, the temperature dropping 10 degrees in 20 minutes, the sky getting closer. She didn't turn the radio on, just drove. She thought about Ruth's words, "Silence is the most expensive thing in the world." She thought about Dean's face when she'd told him everything. Not the face of a man receiving new information, but the face of a man finally setting something down he'd been carrying. She thought about Warren's note in the file margin. "This is above my pay grade right now. It won't be in 2 years." She thought about what it had cost her exactly to be indispensable. How the bill had come due not in work hours or missed vacations but in something harder to name. The slow, quiet accumulation of a self that existed only in relation to being needed. She thought about Cassie at 7:15 on a Saturday morning with a paper bag and a mug, and the most direct sentences she'd heard in years. She thought about a hand raised over a shoulder on a mountain road. The mountains appeared at the edge of the highway. And she felt it. The same thing she'd felt on the way up, the sense of the world rearranging itself into something that made more sense. Like a sentence finally finding its verb. Pine Ridge on a Saturday in late October was gold and cold and exactly itself. She parked in front of Dawson's at 2:40 in the afternoon. She was getting her bag from the back seat when she heard, "You're late." She turned. Cassie was on the front step of the motel, arms crossed, dinosaur backpack, the gray eyes doing their assessment. "My drive was," Meg started. "You said Saturday morning. It's still afternoon, which is still Saturday. Saturday morning and Saturday afternoon are not the same thing. Philosophically speaking, that's not how time works," Cassie said. Then without pause, "Did you bring the mug back?" "It's in my bag." "Good." Cassie uncrossed her arms, apparently satisfied. "Dad's at the garage. He's been there since 7. A pause. "He cleaned the whole front office this morning. Ruth mentioned he does that when He never does that," Cassie said. "I've lived with him my whole life. I have never once seen him clean that office." She picked up her backpack. "I'm just saying." She walked away down the sidewalk. Meg stood in front of Dawson's holding her bag and watched a 14-year-old girl turn the corner with the bearing of someone who had accomplished what she came to accomplish. She crossed the street. The front office of Pruitt's Auto was in fact extremely clean. The counter had been wiped down to a shine. The magazines were in a stack instead of a scattered arrangement across every available surface. Someone had replaced the burned-out bulb in the overhead light. She hadn't noticed it was burned out before, only noticed now that the room was bright and even. The floor had been swept, possibly mopped. Dean was in the second bay, under a truck, just his boots visible. "Front office looks good," she said. The boots stopped moving. A pause. "Ruth said something," he said from under the truck. "Did she?" "She mentioned you were coming back Saturday." A clank of metal. "I was going to clean it eventually anyway." "Of course, I was. I believe you entirely." He slid out, sat up, looked at her. Grease on his forearms. Dark green flannel, different from the ones she'd seen all week. Newer maybe, or just cleaner. Hair slightly off from lying under a truck. He looked exactly like himself, which was exactly right. He stood. Did not look away from her. "You came back," he said. "I said I would." "I know. Then why do you look like you weren't sure?" He thought about that. Because knowing something and trusting it don't always happen at the same time. She looked at him across the clean garage floor. "No," she said, "they don't." He crossed toward her, unhurried. 3 steps, 4, he stopped about 2 feet away. His hands at his sides. The afternoon light coming through the open bay at a low angle, the October gold of it lying across the concrete floor. "I have something to say," he said. "All right. I've been trying to figure out how to say it since Monday." "Take your time." He almost smiled. "You're very calm about this." "I'm not calm at all," she said. "I'm just old enough to know that calm and terrified aren't mutually exclusive." The almost smile became a real one. All the way to his eyes. And there it was. Right there. The thing she'd been carrying without knowing she was carrying it, for 35 years. In a plain white envelope, in the bottom of every bag she'd ever packed. Not the note. Not the photograph. This exact smile. "I loved you," he said. "At 25. I know we'd known each other 3 weeks. I know that's," he stopped, started again. "I know what that sounds like. But I did. And then you were gone and I did what you do. I adjusted. I built a life around the adjustment." He looked at his hands. "And then you were standing on the side of a mountain road and I looked at you and I thought, I know her. Before I knew why, before I remembered just. I know her." Meg stood very still. "And then I read the card," he said. "And I thought, no. Things like that don't. But it was you, it was actually you." He looked up at her. "And I've been standing at the edge of saying this since you walked into my garage that first morning. And I'm done standing there." He looked at her directly, no management, no containment. Just the thing that was true. "I love you, Meg. I think I've loved you this whole time, underneath everything else. I know we're not 25. I know you have a life that's," he gestured, meaning enormous. Meaning everything. "And I have this." He meant the garage, the truck, Pine Ridge. All of it. "Dean, and I know Cassie is 14 and has opinions about absolutely everything. Dean." He stopped. She reached into her coat pocket, the envelope. She took out the note and held it out to him. "Meet me at the fountain Friday. D." He looked at it. His hand went still the way it had gone still on the mountain road when he'd looked at her business card. The same pause, the same recalibration. "You kept this," he said, "through 3 house moves. 8 years." She held his gaze. "I didn't know why I couldn't put it down. I thought for a long time it was guilt. Then I thought it was grief. Then I just stopped analyzing it and accepted that it was going with me wherever I went." She paused. "I know now." He looked at her, waiting. "Because you were already there," she said. "You were already the person I was measuring everything against, and nothing was ever quite." Her voice caught. She let it. Nothing was ever quite level. He was very still. "I love you too," she said. "I think I have since a night in October 35 years ago, when you stayed on a campus step until 4 in the morning, with a girl you barely knew because she was scared and you didn't want her to be alone." She held his gaze, "and I have spent a long time being angry at the years, at the distance. At all the things we didn't get to be to each other. Meg, but I'm here now." Her voice was steady. "And I'm not 23, and you're not 25, and I think that might actually be the point. Because I don't need you the way a 23-year-old needs someone. I want you, which is different, which is better." He looked at her for a long time. The garage was quiet. The October light across the floor. Then he reached into his shirt pocket. His phone. He looked at her. "I looked this up about a year ago," he said. "I didn't know why I was doing it. I'd been sitting here one evening and I just looked it up." He pressed play. A song, old. 35 years at least. A piano opening she recognized before the first measure finished. Recognized in the body, not the mind. The way you recognized things that had happened to you before you had words for them. A song from a radio in a study room in a building at Westfield University, playing low in the background on a night in October while 2 young people sat on library steps and talked until the sky went from black to gray. She stood completely still. "You mentioned it that night," Dean said. "The name of it. I wrote it down and I lost the paper, but I remembered." He looked at her. "I still knew it the second I heard it again." The song played in the garage. Tinny from a phone speaker, and still exactly what it had been. And Meg laughed, not at him. Not at any of it being funny. Just. The laugh that came from somewhere deep and surprised and overwhelmed. The laugh that had nothing to do with humor, and everything to do with something being so specifically, irreplaceably, right that the body didn't know what else to do with it. "You kept the name of the song," she said. "In my head, for 35 years, Dean Pruitt. Margaret Hayes." Her name, her old name. The name of the girl on the library steps. She crossed the 2 feet between them. He put the phone in his pocket, put both hands on her face, large hands. capable hands, slightly stained at the edges the way they always were. Holding her face like something he'd thought about for a long time and wasn't quite sure yet was real. "Hi," he said. "Hi," she said. He kissed her. Not dramatically. Not like the movies made it. Like something that had been true for a long time and was finally simply being said out loud. November became December. December became a new year. The mountains around Pine Ridge went white. Real white, not the decorative dusting of warmer climates, but the deep, committed white of Colorado winter that settled in and meant it. The kind of white that changed the acoustics of everything, muffled the town into a softer version of itself, turned Main Street into something from a photograph that people kept on their desks to remind themselves that places like this existed. Meg drove up on Fridays, sometimes Thursdays if the week allowed. Occasionally Wednesday evening if she was honest about it, which she was trying to be more of. Warren ran Phoenix. He was, as she'd known he would be, excellent at it. Better than excellent. He was finding his own way of doing it, which was not her way, which was as it should be. He called on Sundays. Real calls, not work calls. They talked about things that weren't the company. It was in its way the most significant restructuring Harlow Properties had ever undertaken. The Denver branch of Harlow Properties had been quietly designated as the company's Western operations hub. Meg worked from there 3 days a week. The other days she worked from a corner table at Carter's Coffee, with her laptop and the ocean blue mug that she'd started keeping at Dawson's because it made more sense than carrying it back and forth. Ruth made French toast on Friday mornings. "I'm not doing it for any particular reason," Ruth said. "Every Friday." "Of course not," Meg said. Every Friday. The afternoon it all settled, really settled into the bone where things lived permanently, was a Saturday in January. Cassie had a school project, local history. She'd decided to interview Dean about the history of Pruitt's Auto, which Dean's grandfather had founded in 1951. She wanted Meg there for reasons she declined to specify, other than to say that Meg was good at asking follow-up questions, and Dad tended to answer things too shortly when it was just the two of them. So Meg was there, sitting in the corner of the clean front office, still clean, as it turned out, because Dean was actually quite tidy and the pre-return cleaning had simply been his existing tidiness applied with unusual focus, on an overturned crate with her mug, while Cassie sat across from Dean with a notebook and a pen and the bearing of a journalist who took her work seriously. "Grandfather Pruitt opened the shop in 1951, Cassie said, writing. "You took over from Jim Dawson when you were how old?" 28. "And you've been running it since." "Since. Do you ever want to do something else?" Dean looked at his daughter. "Like what?" "I don't know, something." Cassie waved her pen. "People from bigger places always ask that. Like staying somewhere means you secretly wanted to leave. Who asks that?" Cassie glanced at Meg, not accusatorially. Just. Noting the way she noted everything. Meg looked at her mug. "I don't want to do something else," Dean said. "I want to do this better, for as long as I'm able to do it." Cassie wrote it down with evident satisfaction. "What's the best thing that ever came through this bay?" Dean thought about it. 1968 Camaro. Woman brought it in about 10 years back. Her husband had left it to her, hadn't run in 20 years. She wanted to know if it was worth saving. He looked at the bay through the office window. Took 6 months. But it ran. Did she drive it? First day it ran, she drove 4 hours. Didn't go anywhere specific, just drove. Came back and cried a little, and then drove home. Cassie wrote it down carefully. Then, without looking up from her notebook, "What's the best thing that ever stopped in front of this shop?" The office went quiet. Dean looked at Cassie. Cassie looked at her notebook. He looked at Meg. Meg looked at her mug. But she was smiling and she knew he could see it. "A silver sedan with a loose battery cable," Dean said. "About 3 months ago. And what happened to it? Fixed the cable, sent it on its way, and then? The driver came back." Cassie wrote that down, very carefully, like the most important data point in the interview. "Good," she said, firmly, the way she said things that were decided. "That's the right answer." She closed the notebook. Capped the pen. "I'm going to Carter's. Ruth said there's pie and I want to get there before it's all gone." She stood, repacked her bag, paused at the office door. "You can come if you want. Or you can stay here being weird. Either way." She was gone. The door swung shut. The keychains clattered. The garage was quiet. Meg looked at Dean across the small office. "She's going to run something significant someday," Meg said. God help whatever it is. I mean that as a compliment. So do I. He leaned forward, elbows on the workbench, looking at her with the specific, unhurried attention she'd gotten used to, the way you got used to warmth after a long time of being cold, slowly and then all at once, and then so completely that you couldn't remember what cold had felt like. How long this weekend? He said. Through Monday. Warren has the board call handled. He handling things better than I expected, which was already better than I thought I deserved. She looked at the mug. The ocean blue glaze in the January light coming through the office window. I spent a lot of years being the person no one else could be. I thought that was the same as being necessary. It isn't. He looked at her. It's the same mistake in two different directions, she said. Being needed because you've made yourself irreplaceable. Being loved because you've made yourself present. I had the first one for a long time. She looked at him. I'm learning the second one. He was quiet for a moment. You're not learning it, he said. You already know it. You just had to remember. She looked at him. This man in his garage in January, in a town at the end of a mountain road, with grease on his hands and his grandfather's business around him, and his daughter's interview notes on the workbench. This man who had waited 4 hours at a fountain in 1989, and carried that quietly for 35 years, without letting it make him bitter or closed or anything other than exactly who he was. She thought about what Ruth had said. The ones who stayed built something. Dean Pruitt had stayed, in Pine Ridge, in himself. In the particular, patient version of hope that didn't announce itself but also didn't quit. He had built something. She just hadn't been able to see it until she stopped moving long enough to look. Then let's go get pie, he said. Before Cassie makes good on her threat. He stood, held out his hand, she took it, his hand warm. Solid. The slight roughness of it against her palm. They walked out of the office and across Main Street into the January light. White and cold and clear in the way of high-altitude winter, the kind of clarity that came from everything unnecessary having been stripped away, leaving only what was actually there. The mountains were doing something with the afternoon sun, that low-angle winter gold, slant and sharp, and lasting maybe 20 minutes before the ridge caught it and it was gone. Carter's windows were warm and lit, Ruth visible through the glass, cutting pie with the authority of someone who had opinions about portion sizes. Cassie at the corner table with her notebook, already writing something, because Cassie was always already writing something. They went in. 3 of them at a corner table. Coffee and pie, and the specific quiet that didn't need filling. The quiet of people who had been somewhere together long enough that silence between them was comfortable. A place to rest, not a gap to cover. Meg had the ocean blue mug. Dean had black coffee. Cassie had hot chocolate, and the disciplined expression of someone who was absolutely not going to acknowledge how pleased she was that things had worked out. Because acknowledging it would be sentimental, and she was not sentimental, she was scientific. Ruth came and refilled everything without being asked. French toast tomorrow, she said, 7 sharp. Ruth, Meg started. I know I don't have to. Ruth went back to the counter. I want to. There's a difference. Cassie looked up from her notebook. There's something structurally interesting, she said, about the fact that a loose cable started all of this. Is there, Dean said. The smallest possible mechanical failure. If it holds, she drives past, you never stop. Nothing happens. She looked at her notebook. But it doesn't hold. So everything happens instead. You're going to use that in your essay, Meg said. I already did. Cassie turned a page. I titled it Failure as Mechanism. Mrs. Aldrich is going to love it or hate it, I can't tell yet. Dean looked at Meg. Meg looked at Dean. Failure as mechanism, he said. I think she's onto something, Meg said. Cassie looked up. I know I am. She went back to her notes. Ruth's pie was excellent. The afternoon went gold and then gray outside the windows. Pine Ridge settling into its Saturday evening. The hardware store closing. The church parking lot filling for the early service. The particular quiet of a small town coming in from the day. They stayed until Ruth started putting chairs up around them, which was Ruth's version of a hint. Outside, the January night was clear and cold and full of stars. The specific density of stars that only existed at elevation, away from city light, in places that had kept enough of themselves intact to still see the sky properly. They stood on Main Street, all 3 of them. Cassie looked up at the stars with the focused attention of someone cataloging. Bioluminescence, she said to no one in particular. That's not what stars are, Dean said. I know what stars are. I'm thinking about bioluminescence because I'm working on a different section of my marine biology research. She didn't look down. You can walk me home if you want, or I can go by myself. I'm 14. I'll walk you home, Dean said. I know you will. He looked at Meg. She looked at him. He tilted his head slightly. Give me 10 minutes, and she nodded. She stood on Main Street while Dean and Cassie walked toward the house. Cassie still looking up at the sky, Dean listening to whatever she was saying about bioluminescence. Their footsteps on the frozen sidewalk, the sound of them fading, the ordinary sound of a father and daughter heading home. Meg stood in the January dark and looked at the mountains. She couldn't see them, too dark, but she felt them the way you felt certain things. Not by seeing, but by knowing they were exactly where you'd left them. Enormous and permanent and utterly indifferent to the dramas of people, and somehow, because of that indifference, reassuring. Still there. Always there. She had spent 35 years building towards something she kept thinking was ahead of her. She had not understood, until a battery cable failed on a mountain road in October, that the thing she was building toward had been waiting for her the whole time. Not in Phoenix, not in the 14th floor office, not in the numbers or the deals or the company that bore her name. Here, in a small town at the end of a road she'd almost not taken, with a man who had kept the name of a song in his head for 35 years. And a 14-year-old who made ceramic mugs in ocean blue and called things by their right names and was going to be, someday, something extraordinary. And Ruth, who made French toast on Friday mornings for no particular reason. Dean came back down the sidewalk, alone. Hands in his jacket pockets, breath visible in the cold air, he stopped beside her. They stood together on Main Street, Pine Ridge, Colorado, in January, looking at the mountains that couldn't be seen. She's writing 3 sections simultaneously, he said. The essay, the marine biology research, and what she's calling observational notes on interpersonal dynamics, which I'm fairly certain is about us. She's going to be extraordinary, Meg said. She already is. A pause. She just hasn't finished becoming it yet. They stood, the cold around them, the stars above them, the town quiet and dark except for the lights in the windows, the warm, ordinary light of people inside their lives. I keep thinking about that road, Meg said. Highway 67. I've driven it twice now in both directions, and I keep thinking, what if I hadn't taken the turnoff? What if I'd stayed on the main highway? What if the cable had held another 20 miles? Dean was quiet for a moment. I don't think about the what-ifs much, he said. I think about the fact that you turned. That's a very you answer. Is that bad? No, she said. It's the best kind. She leaned into him slightly. He put his arm around her. Simple. No announcement. Just the natural adjustment of 2 people who had found the right distance from each other and were done looking for it. They stood there until the cold made staying unreasonable. Then they went inside, to Ruth's motel, to the warmth and the French toast that would be ready at 7 sharp tomorrow, and the mountain in the window of room 4 and the ceramic mug on the nightstand and the plain white envelope that no longer felt like something kept. It felt like something that had arrived finally, at its destination, just like she had, the long way, but home.